think he's past his prime?
The only other 6 drivers who can say that are the top 6 in the championship.
Does everyone love Williams?
It's more disappointing than it is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Inside Track podcast with me, Matt Majendie. This is one of our special summer episodes that we'll be bringing you. And we're delighted to welcome Ben Hocking from the Late Breaking podcast on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Have you been enthralled by the season so far? Not just Red Bull, but the rest of the grid?
I think it's been a good season. Maybe I think people are underrating it a little bit, with the exception of 1 or 2 dud races. I think every other race has at least received a passing grade. And I say passing grade because that will lead us nicely on to what we're doing today.
Because we are going to be rating the teams like a harsh teacher with their red pen. I'm going to ask you to give your grading. So we can go A star at the very, very best. There may be one team possibly in the reckoning there, all the way down to F for fails. Are you a harsh critic or are you going to be a generous teacher?
It's the 3 of us on our podcast. We do a power rankings episode where we look at all of the drivers and rate them out of 10. I find I'm the harshest of the 3 of us, so I am a bit worried today.
Well, I tell you, you could start potentially harshly. So we go from the back of the grid with Alpine, who are a curiosity, aren't they? I mean, I don't know how you best describe them.
I can't beat curiosity. It is an interesting one. I've started with an E grade for Alpine, so not as bad as it can possibly go, but not far off it. The only reason I don't go down to an F is they do have 20 points for a last place team, which already sets a rather dubious record of being the best last place team ever. We'll see if they stay in last place, but you know what, the thing that might be most frustrating or confusing about Alpine is how well they ended 2024. People focus a lot on the double podium they got at the Brazilian GP, which was an epic result. But they forget a little bit more that the last 2 races of the season, Gasly had a 5th and a 7th. Like, they were looking pretty good. And even in preseason testing in Bahrain, they looked reasonable. But I think it was maybe fool's gold because they were also very good or by their standards, very good when we got to the Bahrain GP. It seemed to be very track specific because it hasn't carried over to pretty much anywhere else.
Wouldn't you say if it wasn't Pierre Gasly, it would be quite a clear F, wouldn't it?
I think so. Yeah. Yes, I would agree with that. There's been, Gasly has performed a couple of miracles this season to the point where when he scored points, he's actually scored pretty good points. He's had a 6th, a 7th and an 8th. But you're right. Without Gasly, this looks, this is a team that has essentially changed team principle. Flavio Briatore's back, but the person he was reporting into is no longer there. And they don't have the same driver that they started the season with. And it felt like he was out before he even got in the seat in Australia. So yeah, without Gasly, this is pretty dismal.
And I think I'd agree with your grade on Alpine. But some of the teams above them, it's hard, I think, to grade. If we do climbing up the order to Haas next, they've got 35 points from their season so far. How would you grade them? Because they've had some great moments, some times where both drivers have looked great or one has shone, and then they've had times when they've completely and utterly off the pace.
Yeah, I've maybe been kind to Haas because I've gone with a C grade. I was debating between a C and a D grade because I think overall that car is slower than what it was last year. Hülkenberg was a far more consistent threat than what Behrman and Ocon have been able to be this year. Particularly, and this is incredibly ironic because of how strong they used to be in qualifying versus race pace. It really feels like it's turned 180 this year because qualifying wise, they've had 12 Q1 knockouts between them. And if you were to rank all the drivers based on average qualifying position, Ocon and Behrman would be 16th and 17th. The race pace, I think, has actually been okay at certain tracks, but so often they've been out of position that they haven't been able to take advantage of it, which makes it sound weird that I've gone with a C grade, but there are 2 things that I've been impressed with them. Number one, I think the lineup of Ocon and Behrman is a good one. I think Behrman will come good quicker than people think he will. I think he's on the cusp. And the other thing is, I think they do a good job of essentially setting up their car to be a very fast and a straight line and undercut everyone as much as possible. And sometimes it works, like in Bahrain this year with Ocon, and sometimes it doesn't work with Ocon in Hungary. But they've got the position they're in. Often they might as well give it a go. So I've gone with a C, might be kind.
I think, I've jotted down a D, but I did waver like sort of C minus, D plus. It's that territory. So I've gone D because I felt there've been points where it felt like they should have delivered more, but maybe that's a bit harsh. What I find interesting is Racing Bulls, because I sort of get a take that it's been good for them, but then when you look at their points, it's not a million miles further up the pecking order, is it?
Yeah, Racing Bulls is a funny one because it's very rare that both drivers seem to be on it on the same weekend. Maybe similar to Haas in that, Hadjar had a lot of great form early in the season, and I don't think it's dropped off completely. But as Lawson's pace has seemingly got better, Hadjar has struggled to finish in the points. So maybe that's why they're a little bit off the couple of teams ahead of them. But they do seem to be getting quicker. I think that they're better now than they were at the beginning of the season. So there's reason for optimism that they can remain in that battle for maybe sixth in the championship.
Are you surprised, impressed with how Lawson's turned around the last few races?
Very impressed. Less surprised because when we had him versus Yuki Tsunoda back in V-Carb and the year before that as well, it was obviously a limited stint. But he looked pretty good against Tsunoda. There wasn't really much to choose between them. So I think him matching a rookie Hadjar wasn't completely out the question, but it did require a turnaround. Obviously, the first two races of the season at Red Bull were incredibly difficult for him. He's then maybe a little bit behind the eight ball as a result of that, with having no testing time at the Racing Bulls team specifically. But yeah, I know he's got it in him, but he has been very good of late. A stat that I managed to work out the other day is that in the last 7 races, he's had 4 top 8 finishes. And the only other 6 drivers who can say that are the top 6 in the championship. So he has turned it around quite a lot.
So would you, if you were to remove Yuki Tsunoda from the A team, as it were, would you lift up a Hadjar or a Lawson or someone else entirely?
Oh, the problem for Red Bull is they've tried both and neither stuck. Obviously, they tried Perez, they've tried Lawson, they tried Tsunoda, which is both sort of ends of both extremes. I would not promote Hadjar because it is too early. We forget how young Hadjar actually is. Like, he's still quite a few years younger than what Gasly and Albon were when they got their first drives at Red Bull, the senior team. I would probably wait a little bit for Hadjar, but we've seen how it's worked with Lawson, so it might need to be an external hire. Who, though? That's another question.
I'd probably go a C for Racing Bulls. What would you be at?
Yeah, absolute match. I've gone with a C as well. The Hadjar's performances since that point have definitely elevated this. P6 at Monaco was a standout. He was best of the rest at Japan as well. And no Q1 knockouts is incredibly impressive for a driver in a Racing Bulls 14 races into this season.
But what about Kick Sauber? You can't not be impressed with their sort of vaguely disastrous initially and now just an exciting team to watch.
Yeah, much like their season so far. There have been a few gradings where I've looked at the team and maybe got more negative the more I thought about it. Sauber's the complete opposite. Obviously, the start was very difficult. If not for a 7th place finish for Hockenberg at the Australian GP, which was, I don't want to say fortunate because that diminishes the achievement, but equally without those conditions, that car wouldn't have been there. Without that result, they would have no points after 8 races this season. So they were struggling a lot. But then you look at all of the positives since then, including, I think Jonathan Wheatley's been an excellent hire. Even early on, I think that was a really shrewd move from the team. Pit stops have been really good. Outside of McLaren and Ferrari, I think they might be the 3rd best team on the grid, which if you remember the beginning of the 2024 season, they could barely do a pit stop under 5 seconds. They were struggling that much. So to see that turnaround, I think, has been good. Pace-wise, obviously, the car's got better. Bortoleto, I think, is impressing in the last few Grand Prix. He's showing why he won F3 and F2 back-to-back. And the car itself is much better positioned than where it used to be. So, yeah, the more I thought about it, I ended up with a B grade on Sauber. But the more I thought about it, the more it's really turning around for them.
Early part of the season, I may have given them an F, depending if we had this conversation much earlier. But I'd also go with a B just because of it's not just one driver. Hulkenberg at Silverstone and Bortoleto has been great. The Wheatley one, you say, I mean, those pit stops, that was his lifeblood at Red Bull, and you can suddenly see that effect. What about Bortoleto? He'll be in the conversation for Rookie of the Year, won't he?
Yeah, this is one where I've been beating the drum about Bortoleto all season long, and now I get to be a bit smug about it because it's finally starting to show. I think there were signs of his improvement even before he started scoring points. There were a couple of races around sort of Miami and Imola where he was starting to show some really good pace versus where the Sauber was at that time, and it wasn't quite getting noticed. But now that Sauber's in a better spot, suddenly people are paying attention to what a great driver he is. It's very difficult to win F3 and F2 back to back. There's a reason that the list of drivers that have done that is not only limited, but all of the drivers that have achieved it have gone on to do very good things in F1, the likes of Charles Leclerc and George Russell. So that stands him in pretty good stead. And for Audi, obviously coming in next year, taking over from Sauber, it's a very good sign. Both of these drivers, Hülkenberg and Bortoleto, are on a multi-year deal. This was always going to be a bit of a prep year, bit of a gamble, multi-year deal on a rookie, and you're not sure how it's going to go. I think they're feeling pretty happy about their decision right now.
What do you think about Aston as a sort of grade, I guess, for them this year?
Yeah, my expectations for Aston Martin are a little bit higher than what I've got for Sauber and Haas, just based on what that team has achieved in the past. Even when they were Force India and Racing Point, they were able to punch above their weight. So I was sort of torn between a C and a D on this one. They've really struggled with tyre wear this year that has negatively impacted their long run pace. There's something there. And this is another team that maybe isn't overly concerned about whether it happens this year or, more importantly, happens next year for them. But it does continue that downward trajectory really from the beginning of 2023.
It's amazing, wasn't it? They were the podium finishers at the start of that season. You were like, wow, where did that come from? And you thought that would continue. They're not really kicked on. I'm going to ask, are you going to the C or the D? Where is it? Low C or a high D? How are you?
I'll be harsh. It's a big organization. I'll go with D.
Okay, I'm going to go low C, but I think either's fine because it feels like they should be doing better. Of the rest of, I guess, the remaining team in that mid-range is Williams, who were one of my favourite teams early in the season. I think does everyone love Williams, or am I being naive there? Sort of like a favourite second team because of the history there and the struggles they've had and the rebuild they're going through. Yeah,
I think even with the way that Williams is set up now versus what it was set up sort of pre-Doralton Capital and it being a family organisation, I think the heritage of Williams, which they like to play into that a lot, does mean that they are highly popular. I think if you were to ask sort of everyone what your second favourite team is, Williams would come up more often than not. But I've been impressed with Williams so far this year. Even with the downturn in the last few races, it's still enough for them to be fifth in the championship. And if they were to hold on to that, that would be their first fifth place finish since 2017. They've got 70 points already. And to put that into some context, when it comes to Williams, if you were to add together all the points they scored from 2018 to 2024, which is 7 complete seasons, they scored 84 points in those 7 seasons combined. So 15 more, and they beat that in 1 year. It's a turnaround. And also I think that they are slipping a little bit because they were quite early in coming out saying they would have turned their attention to 2026 perhaps earlier than other teams. So I'm excited, even though maybe other teams are overtaking them, I'm excited about what's coming. And there's sort of high hopes, I think, for next year. You're right. Like, they have been very open about, we're not here to fight for 7th. We're not here to fight for 6th. We're here to build the foundation of this team to ensure we can win races in the future, whenever that might be. So if it's for long-term gain, I don't think the team will be too worried about them stepping back a little bit here.
Have we given a grade? I don't think we have for Williams. What would you go for?
I landed at B. Maybe a high B. It was going to be, if we go 5 races back, probably an A. But the downturn in performance, I think Sainz has struggled a little bit more than I thought he would in that seat. So because of those couple of things, I knocked it down to a B.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think B is fair. I think A doesn't feel quite right with the last few races. We're looking at the sort of top teams now, I guess, the ones, the sort of front runners. It's quite odd, really, because there's quite an ebb and flow of how these teams have been during the course of the season. So what about Mercedes, if we start with them? At some tracks, they've looked absolutely sublime. And at some tracks, like Austria, they were over a minute off the pace, weren't they?
Yeah, unfortunately for them, similar to last year, that they do seem to be inconsistent. And I was thinking about all of these sorts of teams in and behind McLaren, and it does just feel like this fight for P2 is a race for not wanting it. Like it's right there for the taking for all 3 of these teams, and for various reasons, none of them are grabbing it. From Mercedes' perspective, I think a lot of that comes down to not having solved the issue around the operating window of how hot the track is. We've seen them in cooler conditions, particularly last year, perform better. They looked better in Hungary last time out when it was far cooler than we were expecting or what we would normally get at Hungary. But yeah, and then you've got Canada just sitting there as some weird outlier that just doesn't make sense with anything around it. So very tricky team to judge.
Well, if we would break it up and not just the team, but if we talk about George Russell, he's probably been one of the most impressive drivers this season and sort of outdriven the car or sort of took to the limit anyway.
Yeah, I said, I must have said on an episode a couple of races back, and I stand by it. I'm not sure I'd have him as my driver of the season, but I would not blame you for having him driver of the season. I wouldn't dismiss that opinion because he has been very good. And if you look at all of his results so far, his 3 worst results have been P11 at Monaco. His car gave up on him in the most important qualifying session of the year. P10 at Silverstone, strategy. P7 at Imola, also strategy. I don't think any of those 3 races you can put solely on George Russell as to why he's in those lesser positions. You take those 3 out of the equation, you're left with 11 top 5 finishes. He has been incredibly consistent and he's been best of the rest a few times and just taken opportunities where, I don't know, the Mercedes has afforded him an opportunity.
If I were him, I'm not sure I thought Mercedes handled, we've got the whole Verstappen rumours. I'm not sure they handled George Russell and Kimi Antonelli's future brilliantly. I don't know what your take is that. Like, I'd be a bit aggrieved if I was a George Russell.
Yes, because like I say, like there is a case to say he is top 5 in the sport right now, maybe top 3. And I think Toto Wolff was in a slightly difficult position of you have your best driver at the moment, a potential best driver for the future, and maybe the best driver in the sport right now in Max Verstappen, and you can only have 2 of them. So I think Toto Wolff was trying his best to sort of dance around the issue and not commit too much one way or the other. But there must be natural frustration from George Russell in that regard because there's very little else he can do.
Well, what about his teammate? You talk about this young rising star. It's been difficult, and again, I think the chatter about his future probably has not helped him in his confidence on track.
I think the issue for Antonelli and for Mercedes has been, I think their pace has somewhat dropped off versus where they were at the beginning of this year. I don't actually think the gap between him and George Russell has changed much, but I think whereas maybe, let's say 3 tenths or so on average between the 2 of them, I think early in the season, that lands Antonelli at P6, P7, sort of the back end of the top runners. I think with Mercedes maybe dropping back a little bit, 3 tenths away from George Russell now is in the clutches of the midfield. And as soon as you get in the clutches of a very tight midfield, if you are slightly off in qualifying, that can ruin your weekend completely, as he's seen a few times in the last few races.
Right, so if you had to grade them, where would it be? I'm personally going to mark them down for their handling of their drivers in the future, but maybe that's a bit harsh. But where would you mark them?
I landed on a C. I think the win for Russell helps them out a little bit at the Canadian GP. The fact that they haven't been able to replicate that pretty much anywhere else means I definitely couldn't go higher than a C. But just based on, again, it feels like this P2 in the championship is sort of there for the taking, and they haven't been able to do so.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with the C. This next team, though, I don't even know how you grade Ferrari. Like, I don't know. They're just are you shaking your head? I haven't even.
I am shaking my head. It's something we do very frequently on Late Breaking, is shake our head at Ferrari because. We have a segment in our race review episodes that is dedicated to a big brain strategy of the Grand Prix, which is usually in jest. And Ferrari win that far more often than anyone else. They continue to just head scratching. It really is. They have a chance of just landing in the same position as they were last year, and that will tell nothing of the story of what's actually happened.
I mean, it was madness. The last race before we went into the summer break in Hungary, you've got their star driver that they're spending 56 million on a year, standing up and saying, I'm absolutely useless. And the answer is, you should replace me. That was absolutely eye-opening, wasn't it?
It was. And, this is something where there's going to be some frustration in the moment for sure, but at least some of it is going to have built up over time because it has been a long season for someone who is used to just far more success than he's had this year. Obviously, no outside of sprint races, no podiums to date. And if that continues, it would be the first year of his career where he doesn't get a podium. Still got time, of course, but yeah, like you say, you're spending a lot of money on Lewis Hamilton and hoping it comes good. But there was always a risk, I think, based on particularly qualifying last year versus George Russell, that another good qualifier in Charles Leclerc could do a very similar job. And that's kind of how it's gone so far.
Do you think it's an error? Do you think you'd get rid of Lewis Hamilton? Do you think he's past his prime?
I think because you can pretty much draw Hamilton's struggles back to 2022, really, the year after he narrowly lost the Drivers' Championship. I think because that is all contained in one era of F1, I think you at least see if these new cars, this new way of racing in 2026 suits Hamilton far more than what this current set has. You get that sometimes. I think we had it with Vettel as well, to be honest, where a certain generation of cars suits him better. I think the amount you've invested in him, the lack of too many alternatives outside of him as well that you really need to get a hold of, I think that buys him. He should have another year to see how that goes.
If I was grading this on the entertainment value of their team on their team radio, I would give it an A star. Like some of the team radio, Leclerc again at the last race, but some of the exchanges have been incredible, haven't they?
Must Be the Water might still be my favorite one, but it's close. The fact that that's not a runaway leader tells you everything you need to know about Ferrari team radio. It's
so entertaining. There seems to be a nugget from it every single time. But I mean, the reality is we should sort of praise them in the sense that they've turned into the second quickest car on the grid. In theory, like the upgrades have worked. They actually seem to have genuine pace. It looked like Charles Leclerc, it was unthinkable that he could take that race, the last race, to the McLarens, and somehow he did in qualifying and for parts of the race. How do you assess them in that regard?
My co-host, Mr. Harry Eade, likes to say there's something in that car because, and I think he's right, there is something in that car. But I think I recently referred to it as having the operating window of a paperclip. Like, it's just so difficult to get it exactly where it needs to be. I think they have been rightly scared ever since that double disqualification they had at the Chinese GP. It always feels like they're managing some sort of issue. So the underlying pace might be there, but the ability to show it is lacking a lot of the time.
How would you grade them? Have you got a clear-cut grade for Ferrari, or is it a fluctuation?
I wouldn't call it clear-cut, but I do have a grade for them. I've gone with a C, same as Mercedes, because, they are still beating Mercedes in the championship. I guess versus their two nearest rivals of Red Bull and Mercedes. Weirdly enough, with Hamilton as well. Hamilton is the reason they are second, because the second driver of those three teams, Antonelli and Tsunoda, obviously are quite consistently off the pace. Maybe Tsunoda more than Antonelli, but Hamilton is P6 in the championship. He's one position behind Charles Leclerc. So I went with a C. It's more disappointing than it is bad, just based on where they were last year, particularly the back end of last year where they were fighting for wins quite regularly. It's just annoying that they're not there competing with McLaren.
See, I'm being more generous. I'm going to go for a B, and I think it's because it's the best of the rest, but I fear it also might be the entertainment value they've created for me as a journalist and a fan of the sport. So we'll slightly differ there. If we talk about McLaren, I mean,
I was trying to give them a reason not to have an A star. And then I just decided, no, they do deserve it, because as a team, they have been absolutely on it from the off. The fact that they've won 11 out of 14 races, very impressive. If you're doing it on a podium, but they've had 24 out of 28 podiums so far this year. So outside of the double non-podium they had at Canada, you've got a 4th place finish for Norris in Jeddah, and then that 9th place finish for Piastri in Australia, where he was on course to be on the podium that day as well. So the consistency, no matter what sort of track we go to, whether it's, a street circuit, whether it's the likes of Monaco, whether it's Silverstone, it hasn't mattered. They are just quick everywhere. They quite regularly maximize the downforce on their setup, leaving them a little bit slower in a straight line versus the average, because they can get away with it. It just doesn't matter to them. They know they're going to be qualifying at the front. They know they're not going to rely on top speed like some of the others are having to do. The clincher for me was that they have a 299 point lead over Ferrari. And if you added Ferrari and Mercedes points together, they would still be 63 points behind McLaren.
I think what I love is when a team does something that mystifies others. You know, you've heard Verstappen talk about it if he's following a McLaren. How are they doing it? I remember being in the engineering office for one of the races and Christian Horner saying, how is Piastri following so close to Norris, but it's not having any effect? You know, other teams' tyre wear is going out the window and it doesn't matter. It can be blisteringly hot, a really abrasive circuit, and somehow McLaren are making it work. I guess a big factor that doesn't always get talked about, but the Rob Marshall effect. Obviously, he was at Red Bull. He's gone across to that team, and I think he's done great things. He's not quite front and centre like a Stella or a Brown, but I think he's been a big part of it. I've been hugely impressed when a team can't work out what another team's doing and instantly assume because it's Formula One they must be cheating. That's what, you know, or there's some grey areas or whatever. But they've just delivered perfectly, haven't they?
We absolutely love Rob Marshall on this podcast. We added him to our illustrious Hall of Fame at the end of last year for his efforts. An excellent guy, and he's done such a good job at McLaren. I remember the Christian Horner comment. I think his version of the comment was a little bit more unsavory, but I do remember the comment. But it is mystifying, particularly I think it was Austria that weekend. It's just Piastri is able to stick on the back of Lando Norris in a way that no other team is able to do and still keep the tyres pretty much alive for that entire stint. That is a massive reason why they are as in the position that they're in. And you're right, no one understands it outside of them.
If you were looking at the drivers, Norris, Piastri, I'm not talking about grading them, but have you been equally impressed with those two guys?
I think situationally, Piastri's been a little bit better than Lando Norris. There have been a few weekends, particularly early in the season, where I felt like Lando Norris either had the same pace or maybe even slightly better pace than Piastri, but wasn't able to maximize qualifying and is therefore having to do too much in the races to sort of make up for that. I think Jeddah's probably a fine example of that, where Norris crashes in Q3, has to start P10. Piastri, even with Verstappen being in the lead after the first corner of Jeddah, Norris had too much to do to work his way through the field. I thought that was a weekend where pace-wise there wasn't much between them at all. But situationally, I think Piastri's had a minor advantage, but it's all to play for at this point.
If I was putting you on the spot now, who wins the title out of those two?
I think I would have to say Piastri. That's where my head is going. I think if Piastri maybe finds himself, and a lot of the time with these long seasons, the luck will average itself out. I think Piastri at some point is probably going to find himself in the same spot that maybe Norris was in at Hungary or Imola, where he's the one that's maybe not maximized qualifying, but he's then therefore the one with nothing to lose and tries a strategy that just so happens to actually be the right strategy. We've had Norris do that a couple of times so far this year. It might be Piastri's turn at some point. So the only thing that would concern me a little bit about Piastri is that Piastri was quite good in the middle of last season, but tailed off quite a bit towards the end. Now, whether that's because the motivation wasn't there wasn't too much to fight for, who knows? But Norris had a better track record overall at the close of 2024 versus Piastri.
And to finish, it's obviously the team that I guess I know the best of those on the grid, but Red Bull Racing. Now, we talk about Ferrari being hard to grade. How do you grade Red Bull?
This isn't going to be a kind comparison to Red Bull, but it might be a similar situation to Alpine, where without Gasly, Alpine's ranking would be pretty poor. Without Verstappen, I think Red Bull's ranking would be pretty poor because they have similarly had a lot of turmoil this year. They don't have the same lineup they started the year with. They don't have the same team principle that they started the year with. And really, they have relied on Verstappen pulling out some really excellent performances. That Q3 lap at Suzuka, I think, deserves to go down as one of the best in recent times. That was that good, I think. And obviously, he held on to the win there. His pace at Imola as well was phenomenal. The problem for Red Bull and for Verstappen, it's too few and far between. There are some weekends where they're just not on it. Hungary, as we've just seen, Bahrain earlier in the year was a real struggle as well.
I love Suzuka. I love that when it cuts to the pit wall and Horner and Vacher are just looking, like proper head blown moment. And I talked to Horner about that, and he talked to how he was watching the telemetry and seeing whether he was up or down or whatever, and just couldn't quite believe it. And I love it that Verstappen can still surprise that team with his brilliance. And that was such a moment that, I don't know, it felt like a lap that no other driver would do on the grid, maybe.
I think so. I think, maybe Leclerc would have something to say about that. But outside of him, I'm not sure about anyone else right now when it comes to one lap pace. That was really phenomenal. I guess the problem for Red Bull has been because of that pace deficit, they've often had to take a few more gambles, I think, strategically. So we saw, and again, this is one that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. You look at the Belgium sprint race, they had a very clear game plan of if we can give Verstappen enough straight line speed, he can make the overtake on Piastri, before we get to Les Combes and maybe hold him off for the rest of that sprint. And it worked. We've also seen Silverstone, they set up in the hope that it might remain dry, gave him enough to get pole. It doesn't remain dry, and McLaren have ended up dominating. But they know that if they just do the same thing as McLaren, odds are they're not going to have enough. So it's forcing them into these slightly, I don't know, odd situations, odd strategies, maybe.
Yeah, I guess they've got to do that. You'd have to take, as a strategist, you just have to take a risk when you're not the quickest car, and sometimes it works brilliantly, and sometimes, gosh, Silverstone. I don't think anyone had seen quite as bad weather as that turned out. It was biblical when it came down, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And we saw that both McLarens overtook Verstappen on track on that day, and trying his best in terms of a safety car restart, and it's understandable. Like Verstappen is in a position where he's already won championships. He knows he's not going to win this championship. So race to race, I don't think he's bothered if he finishes 6th or 7th in a Grand Prix or 5th or 4th. He's going to go for a win if it's there for the taking. But that causes desperation and sometimes errors like we saw from Verstappen on that safety car restart, similar to Spain as well.
What have you made of Yuki Tsunoda in the dozen races he's had for the team going into the summer break?
I think he has struggled based on Red Bull's struggles. Now, that's not to completely, give him a pass here, but certainly having a few temps deficit to Verstappen now is far worse than what it would have been a couple of years ago. We've seen even Verstappen in Hungary really had to scrap to make Q3. So if you're a couple of temps off the great Max Verstappen, you're not doing too badly, but position-wise, you're going to be 10 positions apart or so on the grid. I think the issue is qualifying, because if he can get clear of this midfield and maybe show a little bit more in terms of race pace, I feel like a lot of the time he's not even really able to show what he can do because he's stuck behind another car based on a Q1 exit or even a Q2 exit. What he needs to get back to is he was actually making Q3 fairly regularly at the start of his Red Bull stint, but that's fell off quite a bit. He needs to get back to that first and foremost.
What do you do? Do you keep Yuki for next season? And if not, who do you bring in alongside Max?
I think you keep him just because I don't love another option enough. Maybe you call Williams and see if Carlos Sainz is willing to get out of that deal, possibly. But everything that's been indicated from the likes of Helmut Marko before is that he's too expensive and they don't want that to happen. That could have happened before if they wanted it to, and it hasn't. I don't think Lawson is ready for another go. I don't think Hadjar's ready for his first go. What's going to be really interesting, though, is the domino effect of it, because if you don't do anything with Tsunoda's seat and you want Arvid Lindblad in F1 next year, maybe, there's got to be a seat for him somewhere, and Lawson and Hadjar are in those seats at the moment. So it kind of trickles back down to what the second team's doing, that decision about Tsunoda. But I think you might keep him for lack of other options.
I wonder what you made. You mentioned him before, but what you and the podcast made of Christian Horner's sacking. I guess you didn't see that coming either.
No, I didn't see it coming whatsoever. I was shocked by it. I was always a bit more surprised that he wasn't under more external pressure than what he was, because again, going back to the Perez situation, that wasn't great. He's never really been able to solve this second driver issue. We know a lot of people have left: Jonathan Wheatley, Rob Marshall, Adrian Newey. It's a long list of not only senior Red Bull members, but long-time senior Red Bull members as well. I was surprised in the moment, for sure. What I think is maybe most worrying for Red Bull and any Red Bull fans is the timing of it. So if you were really confident about 2026 and the new regs, I think you just play out this season, right? Like, I think you, even if this season ends up in 4th place and no more wins, if everything's looking pretty good for next year, I feel like you want Horner in charge of that. That sort of maybe a few alarm bells that the timing of it was a bit off.
Yeah, I think Red Bull Austria were more concerned it was sort of becoming Horner racing, I think. But my concern is because he was all powerful and everything ran through him, he's kind of the glue that's holding that team together. And when you're in a transition period as a team, you need that glue. There's clearly a rebuild phase that's happening that may take a few seasons to manifest itself into properly being truly and consistently competitive again. So the worry is when someone like that gets removed, I don't know, House of Cards maybe falls apart. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I quite possibly. I think it's a bit of an old adage, but because throughout certainly 2022 and 2023, Red Bull kind of had no one to fight on the grid directly, that sometimes lends itself to fighting between yourselves. And it was always a bit odd that you've got such a team that is performing so well on track as it was at the time, seemingly in a bit of disarray behind the scenes with maybe various camps, and we're kind of in the fallout from that. I think the question is it all going to completely fall apart, or can Lauren Mecki sort of stop the rot as it is and build the team back up to something close to what it was a few years ago?
Talk about difficult. So I think that's probably an appropriate way to sum up how to grade Red Bull. Like they've had A races, they may even had F races, or maybe E races, maybe F's too harsh. But where would you rank them overall in the 14 races, the first sort of part of this season before the summer?
I think based on the drop-off from where they were last year and now being a comfortable 4th place, still having issues with the second seat, Christian Horner having left, they were a Max Verstappen exit away from this being a really, really bad grade. But even with that, I'm still going somewhere between C and D. I would maybe, just because it's the last one, be kind and elevate it to a low C. See,
if you were to go on entertainment value for everything that's happened,
A star.
A star, another solid performance there.
Easy.
I think I'd give them maybe I'm blinkered a bit, having sort of got to know people there, but a sort of a high C, I think I'd go, just because there have been like the Imolas, the Suzukas, those amazing moments. I mean, it wasn't so long ago Max was flying around that sprint race in Silverstone, and that seems a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's just been so inconsistent from them this year, where they have had a few occasions where Verstappen has produced his magic and is able to fight for the win and really be the thorn in the McLaren side, even when it hasn't resulted in the end result hasn't been good, like Miami and Jeddah. Like, he at least led a Grand Prix, but you look at Hungary, you look at how quickly the tires fell off in that race for him in stints. They're going to have to find a solution to that to at least maybe have one or two more shots for victories in the second half of this year.
Right, well, that's our grading done. Our sort of teacher's pet is McLaren, and head teacher's office Alpine, I think, would probably a loose assessment. But unfortunately, you're contractually obliged to come back in December when the season's done and dusted to grade again. I don't know how much that'll change, whether there'll be fluctuations between some of those top teams. You'd think McLaren will continue where they are.
Yeah, there's still plenty of time. I think it's as we mentioned a little bit earlier, like there's still 10 races left. Not that long ago, that would have made about 2/3 of a season. So there's still plenty of time for these teams to make a move, particularly in the midfield. Like, Williams aren't completely safe in 5th. The 6th to sort of even down to 10th in Alpine, that could end up in any order. So I imagine, particularly amongst the lower ends of the grid, we might have some great changes when we come to December.
There we go. That's the fun of Formula One. We don't really know what's going to be thrown out from Zandvoort onwards. But I just want to say very big thank you, Ben Hocking from the Late Breaking Podcast, for joining us today.
Thank you very much indeed.
As always, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Track. If you're listening to this, remember you can watch all of our episodes and interviews on the Inside Track YouTube channel, and hit the subscribe button while you're there. The Inside Track is funded and made by BBC Studios, a commercial company that's wholly owned by the BBC. It's produced by Yarek Zaba. Video editing and social media is by Georgina Revel. Paul Smith is the executive producer.